All right, so this lecture is just going to be muscles of the arm, so the anterior and posterior compartment of the arm. The first one in your list, so on page 112 of the lab manual, is coracobrachialis. This muscle is great because it has the name tells you its origin and insertion. So coraco refers to the coracoid process of the scapula, which is right here. And then brachialis refers to the humerus, right? The brachial region of your arm is where your humerus is. And so it just inserts onto that mid shaft of the humerus. Action is to flex and adduct. So hopefully you can picture in your mind's eye that if you shorten the fibers towards the origin there, you're going to get a slight flex. So it's going to lift your arm up in the frontal plane, and then it's going to also bring it in towards your midline, so adduct. The next one in the list is called Biceps Brachii. This is a muscle that most people know. So here it is on the arm. Answering questions on the exam, you want to say it's the Biceps Brachii. That's the full name. So biceps refers to the fact that it has two heads. You can see there's a split in this diagram right here. And then brachii, again, refers to the brachial region of the arm. So it's on the humerus. Let's take a look at a more detailed picture. So biceps brachii, here are the two heads a little bit better shown, right? So we have our origins. We have two separate origins of the heads. So the long head has an origin on the supraglenoid tubercle of the scapula. If you remember where that was, the glenoid cavity, there's a little bump right at the top of that cavity called the supraglenoid tubercle. And then our short head is our coracobrachialis. So lots of muscles have an origin here. And they are, both of these heads are going to insert onto the same place, the radial tuberosity of our radius. And because it inserts onto the radius, it's going to have a function to rotate your forearm, right? So because if you remember, the radius is the bone that spins when you supinate and pronate your forearm. So you have to move the radius if you were to supinate or pronate your forearm. That's the bone that twists. So you want to move that bone. So if you look at the the biceps, excuse me, actions, you can see flexion of the arm and flexion of this and supination of the forearm. So let me explain the arm and forearm here. Because the biceps brachii crosses two joints, technically it crosses the shoulder joint. So they see the tendons go over the shoulder. And then it also crosses the elbow joint. It's going to have action at both of those joints because it's going over them. So here, right, the muscle is going to shorten that joint angle, so it's going to actually lift your arm up in the frontal plane or flex your arm. And then the forearm, same thing. So if you bend your elbow, right, like you're doing bicep curls, that's sort of the primary action of your biceps brachii, is to really flex your forearm or flex your elbow. But it also has this other action at the shoulder, which is why you have two actions there, flexion of the arm and flexion of the forearm. The twisting action, the supinating action, again, because it has insertion point on the radius, it can help to rotate your palm up in that supinated position. So just remember that if a muscle is going to have the action to supinate or pronate, the insertion of that muscle has to be on your radius. Okay. So let's look at the brachialis muscle. So here's a model, right? So we have our model, and this is the groove that you can see of our biceps brachii, and the long head is lateral. So there's our long head is lateral and our short head is medial. So long head is lateral, short head is medial. The brachialis, the last one here, is in this box. It's going to be deep to the biceps brachii. So we can see the brachialis in all these pictures here. Let's start with this one. So the brachialis is a shorter muscle. It only runs from the humerus to our ulna. So if you look at this muscle, right, it goes to the coracoid process of the ulna. This means that the muscle, I'm sorry, I think I said coracoid process, coronoid process of the ulna. This muscle can only flex the elbow joint because the attachment is on the ulna. It does not help to spin the radius, right? It doesn't have anything to do with the radius. So it attaches to the ulna. And the only action the ulna does, right, is it can only flex or extend because of the trochlear notch attaching to the trochlea. Like that's the only action that the ulna permits. So we only have flexion of the forearm here. So again, here's brachialis deep, and then here's another image of our models, right? So if we took the biceps brachii off, we can see the brachialis there. On the posterior arm, there's only one muscle. This one muscle has three heads, though, so it's called the triceps brachii. The three heads are visible on the model. They're not visible here in this image, but let's talk about it anyway. So it's a triceps brachii. The long head is going to be, well, let's start with, there's three heads, right? So there's the medial head, which is medial. The medial head is actually very small and thin and sort of flat and kind of ducks underneath our long head. The long head is going to be a large head that is going to be more medial than the lateral head. Of course, the lateral head is going to be the most lateral of the three. If you're looking at our muscle models, right, this is our most lateral one. So this is our lateral head of the triceps brachii. This really long, big muscle here, this is our long head of the triceps brachii. And for the medial head, you would look down here, and there's a slight, if you look at, there's a slight groove here, and that would be the medial head. So the medial head is something that you would have to look at the model for in your hand. It's not that great here, and this image actually doesn't have it at all. But you'd have to look out for a thin, flat muscle that is medial. You can see that all of these muscles have a separate origin. So the long head is the infraglenoid tubercle of the scapula, very similar and opposite to the long head of the biceps, right? The long head of the biceps starts off with the supraglenoid tubercle. The long head of the triceps is the infraglenoid tubercle. The lateral head is just mid-shaft, proximal shaft of the humerus, and the medial head is the distal shaft of the humerus. The nice, easy thing about this muscle, though, is that it has the same insertion. So it inserts onto the olecranon process of the ulna. And if you imagine this muscle shortening, it would pull the olecranon process towards the posterior side of your body, towards the back of the scapula, and it would extend your forearm. All right, so this is a way of looking at, just a fun way, surface anatomy. You're not going to be tested on surface anatomy, but we can see the back of his arm here. We have a lateral head, we have the long head. So those are the two sort of big, big bellies of this muscle. And then the medial head is going to be quite small. All right. And this is just a wrap up of our arm, which I thought was interesting to look at side by side diagram in an actual arm. So we have our really big deltoid, right? So we have our anterior fibers of the deltoid, our middle fibers, and our posterior fibers. If you come down here, we can see some of our triceps, right? So number 9, this is our lateral head of our triceps brachii, a big head. Number 8 down here is where you would find the medial head, so it's not very obvious. And if you look at the diagram, triceps tendon overlying the medial head. And then on the anterior arm, right, you have the biceps brachii, and then you have the brachialis. So the biceps brachii is your most superficial, brachialis is deep to that. These two muscles work together, right? The biceps brachii and the brachialis work together to do the same action, so they are called synergists. They both flex the elbow or flex the forearm. And the triceps muscles are going to act opposite that. So the triceps are antagonizing or doing the opposite work as the biceps. So we would call the triceps and the antagonists of the biceps brachii, right? Biceps brachii and triceps brachii are antagonists of each other. They do the opposite action. And then we can also say biceps brachii and brachialis are synergists. They help do the same action. All right. So that concludes that part of the lecture.